Last year, I went shopping at the Dollar Tree, and something crazy happened. It was in the evening, and I drove to Dollar Tree from my apartment after work to get some things. Obviously, it's a good place to shop and save money. When I arrived at the store, it was actually kind of busy. There was a decent amount of other cars in the parking lot and people shopping in the store. I entered and made my way through the aisles. About 5 minutes into shopping was the first time that I saw this one woman. She was also shopping in the store and everything seemed fine. But as I continued shopping, the things that I was getting took me to all different aisles. I started to see this woman in every single aisle that I went down. It started to become really weird, because after like 15 minutes, I wondered if she was following me. Plus, when I looked over at her, I noticed that she didn't have a cart or basket or anything. No items in her hands. So why was she going down all the same aisles that I was? I didn't bother to confront her though. Instead, I just ignored her, because she wasn't invading my personal space or anything. I kept shopping until I finished like 10 minutes later, and the woman was still seemingly following me at that point. So then I went to the front of the store and I checked out, buying all my stuff. Then I left and went to my car. I could not believe it when I saw the same woman walking out of the store after me as well. She got into a different car that was in the parking lot, and I was still ignoring her though. I left and began driving back to my apartment. It was pretty close by, only about a 5-minute drive away. I didn't pay any attention to the woman, to where she was driving to or anything, but she followed me all the way back. I pulled into the parking lot and found an open space. The woman parked in another spot not too far away from me. When I realized that she had followed me, I was still very surprised by the whole thing. I sat in my car for a few minutes hoping that she would leave or something, but she didn't. She just sat there with me and did the same thing. I was much closer to the door to get in the building though, which was good. Then I got all my stuff together and quickly left my car and ran to the door. I got there, unlocked it, and went inside. Then I closed the door behind me and saw the woman walking up. The door was locked now though. She would be able to get in the small entryway area through the first set of doors, but she would be unable to get past the second set of doors, which required a key. As I walked through the lobby, I heard the woman trying to open the doors, but they were locked. Then I went upstairs to my place. I got home wondering why on earth this lady had followed me for so long. I had never seen her before this night. It was really weird. And she never said one word to me the whole time either. But then I heard the buzzer to my apartment ring. My place was kind of old, and from the entryway you could buzz an apartment number and then you could talk to them through the intercom from the lobby, and you could buzz them up if you wanted to. That would unlock the door. If that was the same woman, I did not know how she got my apartment number. After she buzzed me, I asked who was there. She did not state her name, but I heard a woman's voice say, "Let me in." Her voice was monotone and it gave me the creeps. I asked her why she had followed me and who she was. She responded in the same way, "Let me in." I was creeped out and I told her to go away, but she did not. She just kept buzzing my place and I was ignoring her. She buzzed me non-stop for almost 5 minutes straight. It was really annoying. Finally, I answered, and she once more told me to let her in. I told her to go away now or I was calling the cops. But as I was saying this, I heard through the intercom a door open in the background. I heard a different woman's voice saying hi, and the creepy lady then seemed to ask her to let her in the building. I did not want this woman getting in. She would no doubt come to my door and start pounding on it or something. I started yelling loudly over the intercom, "No, don't let that woman in. She's crazy and stalking me." This was enough to scare the other lady. She did not let her in. The actual woman who lived there turned around and left, I guess, because I heard someone walking away and then a door close. She must have been creeped out by the whole thing. But the other woman kept buzzing my place for a few more minutes. Then finally she left. I was so creeped out, but I never saw her again after that. I still wonder why she was following me and why she was being so creepy in general. When I was in my early 20s, I used to jog through a massive cemetery when I came home from college to visit my mom. I loved jogging through there because it was so quiet and peaceful aside from the sounds of nature. One very late afternoon at dusk, I was jogging through the main part of the cemetery. I started to move along a small service road deeper in the cemetery. The road is about half a mile long and connects to another cemetery in an adjacent town. There are roughly 100 yards of uncut grassland and weeds on both sides of the little road that lead to dense forest. As I approached the midpoint of the service road during my jog, I noticed a teenage girl, if I had to guess in the range of 15 to 17 years old, sitting on a massive dead log. The dead log was stripped of bark, and it must have been somehow dragged out close to the road after falling in the woods. She was distinctly wearing 70s clothes, I think. I'm not certain on what the fashion trends were for what decades, but she was wearing massive bell-bottoms and a scruffy white blouse. She had greasy, sandy blonde hair, parted in the middle, and leather sandals on. She did not face me as I approached, and just kept her head facing the dark woods across the other side of the road. But I know she must have heard me hitting the pavement as I approached. So now we were the only people in this old little service road, with no one in front or behind as I passed between the two cemeteries. As I approached her and crossed her line of sight, she quickly shifted her eyes towards me as I said hi. I was shocked by the weirdness of her face, with larger than normal eyes, a tiny nose, thin small mouth, and whiteness of her skin. Her eyes, they were bluish white, like Siberian husky eyes, with massive dark rings around the irises. She said nothing back and just stared at me, expressionless, as I stumbled past. I say stumbled because I immediately felt this force hit me when we locked eyes, which made everything super detailed and surreal. I could no longer hear my own shoes hitting the pavement anymore. For those endless seconds, it was just deafness. No sounds, not even the crickets. Time seemed to slow down as if I were jogging in slow motion. Disoriented as I was, I continued along the road, past her, towards the other cemetery for about 5 to 7 seconds before my curiosity got the best of me. I turned around to jog back, but she was completely gone. Nothing there, just this huge dead log. I checked all around it, nothing. I know the area quite well, and there was absolutely no way she could have left my line of sight unless she sprinted the 100 yards to the woods in less than 7 seconds, which was impossible, especially in her clothes. I scanned the tree line but saw nothing, just darkening woods as the sun fell below the tree line, but I did have a feeling I was being watched. Again, no sound of crickets. Hairs on my neck and arms stood up despite heavy sweating from the run. I think I did my fastest mile of the run out there all the way home before the sun completely dropped. It gives me chills every time I think back to that face and those piercing eyes. Suffice to say, I never felt the urge to jog through there again. This happened back when I was in high school, but it's something that I will never forget. I was home alone for the weekend. My parents went out of town for a work conference, and they both worked at the same company. This happened a few times a year, and it was always fun for me, because when I was home alone, I would just eat pizza and play video games and stay up late. It was cool to have that kind of independence in high school, and my older brother was in college, so it was cool to have the whole place to myself. Our neighborhood was pretty nice. We were not super rich or anything, but overall it was one of the nicer neighborhoods in our city. So I remember on Friday night with my parents out of town, I had been hanging out around the house just playing video games and stuff after I had got back from school. I was planning to just stay up until I got too tired to stay awake anymore, and it would probably be about 1 a.m. or so. I remember that at around 10 o'clock at night, there was a knock at the front door to the house. I went over to a front window to look out of it before answering the door to see who was there. Even though I was experienced in being home alone, it was still always a little creepy at night, or if somebody was at the door. We didn't really get many people at the door, especially late at night. After looking out the window, I saw a cop standing on the front step. Surprisingly to me, right after I noticed him, he looked over and noticed me in the window. He smiled and waved at me in a friendly way. Seeing now that it was a cop, I figured I'd better answer the door for him. And he seemed cheerful, so I didn't think it was anything bad. I went over to the door and opened it. The policeman said hi and sorry to bother me so late at night. He was nice, but something about him seemed a little off. I didn't know what it was, if it was his uniform or something like that, or how he was talking or what. But after I said hi, he told me that he was looking for a suspect in the area. He said that he didn't want to scare me, but he had reason to believe that the suspect might be hiding out in the area, possibly in someone's backyard. Then he asked me if I had seen or heard anything strange, and I said no because I hadn't. He then asked me if my parents or anybody else was home, and I said no. Obviously I wasn't going to lie to a cop. So he then told me that I was probably not in any danger, but he just wanted to look around in our backyard. I said that it was okay, and then he left. The whole thing seemed a little weird, but overall I didn't think too much of it. I was sort of creeped out that there was a suspect in the area, but if a cop was here looking for him, I felt safer about it. So I just went back to my video games at that point. About 20 minutes later, there was another knock on the front door. I went there and saw that the cop was back. I opened the door and he told me that he was working with other law enforcement and the FBI or something like that. I don't remember the exact words he used, but that was basically what he was saying. Something along those lines. He then said that they had an investigation going. He told me to go and leave the back door unlocked and to stay away from that area of the house. I must have had a confused look on my face at that point. The cop then said that he couldn't get into any details but to trust him, and the matter would be resolved by the morning, and that I was probably safe. I said okay, and then I went in the house and unlocked the back door. Then I went back over to the cop and told him that I did. He said that he would be in touch, and then he left. After that, I was super confused. I was trying to think of why I would have to unlock the back door. Did the cops want to use my house as a hideout or something? I had no idea, but I stayed away from that part of the house like I was instructed. Then I went back to playing video games for probably an hour or so. But the whole time, I was feeling more and more creeped out. I didn't feel safe going to sleep. I was paranoid that the criminal guy might get in the back door of the house that was now unlocked. I looked out a window into the backyard, but there was nothing. No cops, nobody at all. I knew that I wouldn't get any sleep, and it was now almost midnight, so I decided to call the local police department. I wanted to get more information or an update of if the guy was caught. Maybe they had found the guy and I wasn't in any danger at all. So I called the police and explained the situation. I was met with confusion at first, but I was soon told that there was no police officer investigating anything in the area and that the guy I encountered sounded like a fake cop. There was no suspect in the area either. They told me to lock the door and said that they would send a real officer to my house. So I quickly ran down and locked the back door to the house. Then I waited. When the real officer got there, he was way different than the other guy. From the way he talked to how his uniform looked, it was way more professional, and I realized that the other guy was definitely a fake. The real cops looked around for the guy for a while, but they couldn't find him. Then they left. After that, the fake cop never returned. I was a little scared for the rest of the weekend, but nothing else happened. Looking back, it was a crazy situation. I think the fake cop was planning to break into our house or something. He probably was going to wait until later that night when I was maybe asleep. I also think that he was nearby in the area and he must have seen the real cops there, and that's why he never returned. Either that or possibly he did try to enter the house, but the door was locked so he went away. I also think he might have been working with someone else. Either way, he was a fake, and I'm glad that I called the real police about the situation. I went to a Family Dollar one time years ago. I used to shop there sometimes. There was one really close to where I lived, and they sold almost everything you could want. One time I went there and the place was really busy. I walked in and people were everywhere. The store was a mess and it looked like it needed to be reorganized. Not long into shopping there that day, I was towards the back of the store and I heard people yelling. I was curious and walked over to see a man who was in a verbal argument with an employee. I didn't know what it was about right away, but the employee and the man were shouting at each other. The employee was yelling at the man to leave, and the man was yelling back, cursing and saying that he didn't have to. The other shoppers nearby were all standing around and watching. The man then finally took a random item from the shelf and slammed it down to the ground. After that, he stormed out of the place. The manager of the store who was yelling at him, at least I assumed it was the manager, kind of followed him to the doors. When the guy was gone, the manager walked back over and things kind of resumed. I asked someone around me if she knew what started the whole thing. She said that apparently the guy had been harassing customers and tossing items on the floor. The manager tried to get him to leave, which caused the whole thing. So then I continued my shopping. When I was done and in line to check out, I just glanced out the front window. But what I saw was a car driving into the parking lot really fast. Then I noticed the car was heading straight for the building. I realized that this car was about to crash into the place. However, there was a handicap sign in front of one of the spaces in front of the store, plus a curb with a sidewalk before the actual store. The car drove right up the curb and then right into the handicap sign. This sign was not one of those skinny ones, but a thick concrete pole. The car smashed into it and then came to a stop. Everyone looked over at once. The car was smoking and it came to a stop like a foot or two in front of the store. Then a man emerged from the car. It was the same guy who had been kicked out of the store earlier. I saw him take off running, and you could guess the cops were quickly called. The store got closed down, and the man was found on foot like 10 minutes later a ways away. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, and the pole in the ground stopped the man from doing damage to the actual building. That was my craziest experience at a dollar store. This happened about 2 years ago. I was 17 at the time, and I was in a phase of being a teen boy where I felt like I needed to work out all the time non-stop. I would work out every day and feel great about it. It was fun, and I started to make a lot of progress. Every day I had set a schedule of things I had to do for my workout plan, and one of these things included running. Every night after it got dark, I would go for a long run around my neighborhood. I hated how I looked, so I always did it at night and would usually run on the side of the neighborhood where no cars and no people ever were. One night, I was on my normal run at around 11:30 p.m. It was the first night I thought of going on a weighted run because I saw a video about it and wanted to try it. I didn't have any weighted gear, so I took one of the plates from my home gym and put it into my backpack. I went out for a run around my neighborhood to the dark, secluded area on the side. I never thought of it as a creepy place. It always made me feel safe in a way. Anyways, it had a dirt road going alongside the big neighborhood and had a canal on the other side of the dirt road. Across the canal were the fences of the people in the neighborhood. Next to the fences across the canal and next to the dirt road were trees and shrubs, so it felt fairly secluded for being a neighborhood. These runs weren't really running, more jogging with stops in between to catch my breath and water breaks. As I was jogging, it felt like a normal night, but about halfway through my jog, I was sure that I heard heavy breathing behind me, not close, but somewhere in the darkness behind me. I looked and didn't see anyone and blamed it on my imagination. I kept my run going and didn't stop for another 10 minutes. When I was about to stop, I heard it again, the same heavy breathing as before, and I turned around and saw nothing. I was getting a little freaked out at this point, but I didn't want to let whatever I thought was following me know that I heard it was there. At the end of my neighborhood, when I went around to the other side of the canal to run back towards the main road, I heard rocks kicking and heavy breathing again behind me. When I got to the other side of the canal across the little bridge, I looked back and saw a figure wearing all black. I stopped for a second and just stared at the spot, trying to see if the figure would move, or if I was still imagining something and just seeing a strange bush or tree. I heard a man's voice speak loudly and say, "Hey, I see you," coming from the direction I was looking. I threw my bag on the dirt and sprinted as fast as I could. As soon as I threw down my bag, I felt a wave of relief because I felt springy and just felt so much faster. I wanted to make it out with my weight and bag, but I'd rather be alive than die with my weight. I came back the next day with my brother and a couple of friends when it was bright outside to search for my backpack, and I found a note attached to it that said, "See you soon." Thinking about it now gives me the chills. Later that week, I heard from the news that a hitchhiker had been killed. A guy that was walking his dog in my city had also been killed the same week that I had my experience. I never saw that man again and never saw him on the news. I'm not sure if he got caught or not, but after that night, I made sure to never go running in the dark again. This is something that happened a long time ago. I worked as a police officer for a few years when I was younger. It's a job that I will never forget and can be very intense at times. It's not for everyone, and it wasn't for me. Overall, it was too stressful for me to do for more than a few years, and so I ended up choosing to change careers. I'm feeling much better now in the career that I currently have. Nothing really that crazy happened in my time as a cop, but I had some friends deal with some really crazy situations. I certainly have a lot of respect for all the officers out there, but one memory in my short time in law enforcement stands out as the most strange thing that ever happened. I worked in a small town. It was way out there and in the country, and normally very quiet. Not a whole lot happened typically in the area that I patrolled. Mostly it would be speeding cars and other traffic violations, occasionally other calls and a little bit of everything, but I'd spend much of my time patrolling the roads. I also worked a lot of night shifts, and so the roads would be very quiet generally. On one night, it was very late. I don't recall exactly when, but the roads were dead. It had been dark out for hours, and the road that I was on had no streetlights. Most of them didn't in that area. There would maybe be one here and there. I was just driving down one road surrounded by woods and coming up to an intersection. When I got to the stop sign, I was headed north, and I saw a car going towards the west who was also approaching the intersection. As I came to the four-way stop, I saw the car not slow down at all and completely blow through the stop sign. It was a silver four-door sedan, and the windows were very tinted. But also what stood out to me was that the headlights were completely off. I'm not even sure how this car was seeing the roads, because there was like nobody else out there at all. Almost immediately, I turned on my lights, and I took a left to conduct a traffic stop on the silver car. There were 2 obvious violations, possibly more, running a stop sign, not having lights on, and maybe even windows that were too tinted. When I turned left, I sped up to catch up to the car. It was not speeding, at least. The speed limit was 55, and the car was probably going about 50. I quickly caught up to it, and the car was almost hard to see in the dark because of it having no lights on at all. However, the car did not pull over. I then noticed that the car also didn't have any back plates on it. Another violation. A wave of adrenaline started to hit me, and I felt myself getting a little bit nervous. It seemed like the car was not going to pull over. As I continued driving right behind the car, we went for another 30 seconds or so, and they still didn't pull over. I turned on my siren to make it more obvious that I was there. There was no way that this person did not know that I was behind them trying to pull them over. But still, they did not move to the side of the road. They just continued driving. They started going faster though, and then suddenly the car made a right down a more quiet and narrow road. I took the right as well, and I radioed in that I was trying to perform a traffic stop and the vehicle was not pulling over. I informed dispatch where I was for possible backup. But in the town where I worked, it was sprawling and very rural, so it would take a little while for anybody else to get there. The car still did not pull over. They drove down the quiet road and then took a sudden left. It was clear that they were trying to lose me. I kept following the best I could. The car soon took this really narrow dirt road. I had never been on this road before, and it was very winding. The trees were growing very close to the road, and we drove down here for a little while, and I continued to try to pull the car over and relay information about what was happening on the radio. As we kept going, I thought about trying to perform a pit maneuver, but I couldn't get to the car and the road was too narrow. The car then turned on another dirt road very quickly and at the last moment. I almost didn't make the turn and I had to slow down. I saw another road shortly after the one that the car took. As I made my way onto that road, I lost a little bit of ground, but I saw where the car went. It turned on another road and was briefly out of my sight. I quickly drove down that road and turned to the one that the car was on. I was just on time to see the car making another turn on a street up ahead. Somehow the car seemed to be navigating these streets insanely well. I sped up and then made the next turn. I saw the car far up the road. As I went faster, the car quickly turned again. I turned onto the next road and noticed that the car was turning once more. This road was another dirt road surrounded by woods. I honestly had no clue where I was anymore. I drove down that road trying to catch up to the car after it had turned again. But when I turned to the next road where I thought that the car went, it was gone. It just wasn't there. I went up and looked for more roads or a secret driveway, but I didn't see anything. I went straight, looking left, right, and forward. I couldn't find the car at all. Its lights had been off, so that gave it a huge advantage, but still, I could not believe that it was gone. I radioed in that I might have lost it. Within 5 minutes, I had help from several more police cars. We all drove the area searching for the next hour or so. We didn't find the car at all. I was left extremely confused. I have no idea how the car got away from me. After that, for the rest of my shift, I was wondering about it. We were not able to locate the car or find out who was driving it. To this day, I don't know. Whoever it was, though, really knew how to drive well. I think the car was also modified and handled really good. Maybe it was somebody who runs from the cops as a sport or kind of a hobby. I also don't know how they saw so well with no lights, but that one's still a mystery to me. A couple of years ago, I used to work at a family dollar store. I was young and in high school, and it was one of my first jobs. I would do a lot of stocking shelves as well as other odd jobs around the store. I was rarely a cashier though. So one night there were a few of us working. When I got there, I started out restocking a bunch of areas in the store. I got some products from the back of the store and then would replenish the supplies in the aisles. It was a very quiet night and things were not too busy at all, which made my job easier. At one point, as it was starting to get late, it was maybe 7 p.m. It was dark out by now, and I was supposed to take out some trash. Our store was not in a very busy area at all. There were other stores and businesses pretty close by, but directly behind our store and next to it was a lot that was sort of open. There was woods that was behind the store, and there was a small gravel area for deliveries behind it as well. Then there was the trash bins right behind the store also. So I left the store through the back door, and when I looked across the small open field to the woods, I noticed something strange. Sort of behind a tree, there was what appeared to be an older-looking SUV there. This car was literally in the woods. I did not know why. I couldn't tell if anybody was inside or not, because it was dark and the windows were too tinted. Plus, I could only see the front part of the car. I thought it was really strange how it was mostly in the woods. but I finished taking out the trash and then went back inside. Then I got back to work in the store doing more restocking and things like that. Later, when it was really late and we closed soon, I was supposed to take out the trash again. By that time, the store had no customers in it at all, and things were very quiet. By now, I had forgotten about the SUV in the woods. However, as soon as I opened the back door to go outside though, I saw the SUV still in the same spot. But right as I looked, I saw several men emerge from it, and they were all wearing dark clothing and what looked like ski masks over their heads. I believe there were 3 or 4 guys there. As quickly as I started to open the back door, I closed it. I maybe saw them for a total of 1 second, and never opened the door all the way. I'm not sure if they saw me or not. I went back inside, and the back door automatically locked, thankfully. But I ran out of the back to the front of the store as quickly as possible. In that moment, I yelled loudly for my coworkers to lock the front doors. I didn't know how to do that, and it was never part of my job. One of the 2 coworkers that was there asked me why. I told her that I saw guys in ski masks outside, and to just lock the doors right now. She saw how serious I was, and my other coworker heard as well. One of them went over and quickly locked the doors. Not even a minute after that, the masked men arrived at the front entrance doors of the store. They tried getting in, and when we saw them, we called the cops. The guys started banging on the glass a little, and we went to the back of the store in case they broke in. But the men did not break the windows or anything. Instead, they turned around and left. The cops got there a short time later, but the men were gone. We told them everything we knew. It seemed pretty obvious to me that the men were planning to rob us. I'm not sure if they had guns or not. I didn't see any, but it was very possible. The men were likely hiding out and waiting until the store was quiet and about to close. I'm really glad that I saw them when I did, and that the doors got locked before the men could enter. I was 14 years old when this happened. We just had an event at school, meaning we had a half day. Even though I was all dressed up in a nice dress and shoes and it was raining, I wanted to walk back home through the park that was between where I lived and my school. I wanted to walk home since my parents were at work, and I figured I would have to wait at school a while before they came to pick me up. I put on my raincoat and started walking towards the park. A couple of blocks away from the entrance, I stopped at a red light where a middle or old-age man was in jogging attire and a light raincoat. Now, I live in the city, and one thing about the city is you hardly ever make small talk with strangers, ever. But he was on the older side, so I didn't think it was weird when he started talking to me. Sometimes older people like to talk. It started out as small talk, but as we both started crossing the street, it started slowly getting stranger. He said to me, "What a pretty dress. Are you going to some sort of party?" I told him I was going to a friend's house and that I had just been to an event. He said, "Well, that dress really makes you look so mature." I didn't comment at all when he said that. He started talking more, still walking right next to me, saying that he had to get his jog in before the rain started and how he liked to run in the park. That would have been all good and dandy, but just a minute after he said that, he walked past where he needed to turn to go to the entrance of the park. This made no sense, and he would have to walk a full extra 8 blocks to enter the park now. He asked to walk me home the rest of the way. I said, "I'm good, thank you. Also, I think you just missed your turn into the park." He made a bit of a sour facial expression before almost immediately becoming all cheery again. He said, "Oh, it's fine. I can always go on a run somewhere different, especially if I get to talk with such a pretty young girl." He stepped a bit closer to the point that if a stranger saw us, they'd assume that we were family or something along those lines. That was the final straw. I immediately said, "This is my stop," before turning into a random fancy building and telling the doorman that a man outside had been acting weird and sort of following me. He told me I could wait inside the lobby. Apparently, the man didn't leave until 5 minutes later when the doorman asked who he was waiting for, and he said his daughter. The doorman then threatened to call 911 after some back and forth, which made the man eventually leave. I ended up calling an older friend who had a car to pick me up. This may have just been me freaking out, but I was sure that I saw the man waiting across the street in a cafe when I went outside to get into the car. It's a big city, so I haven't seen him since, but I'm sure he still goes out running in the area near the park. A few years ago, I lived in an apartment by myself. I worked a job that I no longer have, but for the job I would work all kinds of odd hours. It really messed up my sleep schedule, so I'm glad that I no longer work there. But one thing that I would do a lot in that time period is go on walks late at night. or all kinds of weird hours really. I would also sometimes walk in the early hours of the morning. Near my apartment there was this really long walking trail. It went from the apartment complex to a park nearby, and a large part of the path went through the woods. In that area the woods was massive and it was also very dense. It was common to see animals such as deer or sometimes fox or even coyotes near the path. I know that walking on the path in the woods seems creepy at night, and it is, but I really wasn't that scared. I would walk the trail during the day too, but with my sleep schedule messed up, I'd go a lot at night. It would usually help me to be able to sleep when I would get back, and so that was part of why I would go. It was relaxing, and being outside in the fresh air also made me more relaxed when I got back home. And as you could guess, when I walked at night, I would never see anybody. The trail was quiet as it was, but during the nighttime there would never be anyone. Sometimes outside closer to the apartment complex here and there, I might see people taking their dogs out or something. But once I got into the woods, there was never anyone. I remember up until the night of this story, the scariest experience I had in the woods was when I came across a couple of deer. I heard a noise in the woods and it spooked me, but when I saw the deer, they crossed the path and I just kept going. So on this night, I went out at about 2 a.m. I had recently returned home from work, and it was a nice but cool evening. I wanted to get some fresh air and exercise and then go back and go to bed. When I got out there that night, things were quiet like usual. I didn't see anyone. I got into the woods and walked pretty far. I was maybe 20 minutes out there on the trail and like right in the middle of the thick forest. As I was walking, suddenly I noticed up ahead blue and red flashing police lights. They looked like they were coming from up the trail and right in the middle of the woods. They were to my left, and I thought that it was really strange, but it was hard to tell exactly where the lights were coming from because of how dark it was out there. I was confused nevertheless. I thought that maybe it was coming from a street in the distance behind the woods, and I was just seeing it through the woods. But the more I walked and the closer I got, it looked a lot more like the lights were coming from right in the middle of the forest off the trail. There were really no other paths going off trail, so this was strange. I kept going and soon got as close as I could on trail to the lights. I looked at them and they were definitely in the woods. I didn't really hear anything though, nobody talking or moving through the woods. I kept watching the lights, trying to make sense of them. Then I decided to take a few steps off the trail and into the forest to investigate. However, as I started to go off trail, the lights suddenly turned off. It was really strange. I now hardly saw anything in the dark. For some reason, I called out asking if anybody was there. Looking back, I don't know why I did that, but nevertheless, when I did, I got no response. I heard nothing at all. So at that point, I was feeling kind of creeped out and decided to head back. I walked back on the trail to my apartment. The whole time, I was looking over my shoulder every so often to see if the lights would return. They never did, and I went back home and then went to bed a short time later. I was confused about it, but overall forgot it pretty quickly. However, a few nights later, I went for a walk again pretty late. It was around the same time as before. I'm not sure if it was the same spot again, but overall I remember seeing police lights off the trail in the woods again. This was really weird. I was very curious as to what these were. I thought that maybe they were some kind of security lights. I was sure that there was some logical explanation, but I was just curious as to what it was. So when I got closer, once more I went off the path. Not long into this, the lights all turned off again. It was like the same thing as before. I thought that it was really weird how they turned off as soon as I got into the woods, but I kept going this time. I didn't really hear anything, and I didn't say anything this time. I walked for about 2 or 3 minutes off the trail going to where I had seen the lights. It was pretty thick woods, but soon I reached a little clearing. I was sure that this is where the lights had been. I looked around and didn't see or hear anything strange at all. As I was looking around, I started to feel really creeped out. I asked if anybody was there, and I got no response. Then, as I was still in the clearing, I heard somebody moving in the woods behind me. It sounded like someone walking in the woods. They were farther in the woods and in the opposite direction of the path, and were heading towards me. I happened to be facing the opposite way towards the trail. When I heard whoever was there approaching, I just took off. I bolted for the woods and ran back for the trail. I didn't look to see who was there, and I was not chased, but I didn't stop running until I made it back on the trail. Then I jogged all the way back to my apartment. It was really strange, and I was super creeped out. The next day, I saw that there was a sign at the entrance of the woods, blocking the whole trail that said that the trail was closed and to keep out. I had no idea why or what was going on there. Somebody was in the woods in the middle of the night, though. After like a week, the trail opened again. I did go down it a few more times and walk through the woods, but never again at night. I was living 2 hours north of my hometown right after college, but came back down on the occasional weekend to stay with my family. It wasn't unusual for me to go jogging while I was visiting, and on this particular weekend, I had actually remembered to bring my running shoes, so I went off on a jog. Where I grew up is a small farming community, and everything is laid out in 1-mile square blocks, with some of them cut in half on occasion. I began running, and I went 1 mile and took a left turn. Then I ran a half-mile to where one of the occasional half-mile roads was, before turning around and starting home. Right as I reached the turnaround point, a car slowed down and a guy asked, "Are you okay in this rain?" I was startled and responded that yes, I was fine and thank you. They left and I could see them turn down the half-mile road. I was a bit unsettled because I hadn't known the guy and it was barely raining, not even worth being called a drizzle. Then imagine my surprise when I saw the same car come up behind me again. He kept going past me this time, but I saw him pull to the side and park just past the intersection next to a field. That's when I was officially scared. Fortunately, there's a large dairy farm on one of the corners, so I knew there were people around. My uncle's house is also close. My route had me turning right, where there are scattered houses, but I had been continuing straight past the car, so there were no houses on either side for half-mile, just fields. I made my turn and sprinted to my uncle's house and called my dad to come pick me up right away. I told him and my mom what happened, and they got worried because a lot of our neighbors ran that same route. In fact, my mom had just seen one of them start her run. She hopped back in the car to go stop my neighbor and explained what I had just experienced, and the neighbor asked her for a ride back. Meanwhile, I texted my other neighbor and let her know. The neighbor I texted happens to be former law enforcement. She quickly called me and asked what the car looked like, so I explained. It turns out that same car had stopped and talked to her 11-year-old daughter while she was out in the yard. She told me that she was going to call a friend and if I would be willing to talk to them. I agreed. It turns out the guy had just gotten out of jail. I don't know for what crime, but he was on parole and was not supposed to be hanging out in our area. I found out that he had also stopped another neighbor when she was jogging too, and she said the man kind of backed off when he saw her phone with her. I'm really glad I brought my phone that day with me on my run. This happened one Saturday afternoon last year. I live in an apartment by myself. When I got back home that day, I realized that I had basically no food, so I decided to walk down to the Dollar Tree nearby to get some groceries. I was walking there because it was only a few blocks away, and it was a very nice day outside. I left my apartment and got out onto the sidewalk. The area that I live is fairly busy. There's a good number of neighborhoods, apartment complexes, and businesses. It's also pretty close to the city. So as I was walking there, I was really the only guy on the sidewalk at first. However, when I crossed the street, I heard footsteps a ways back. I glanced behind me and saw this man walking behind me. He was a long ways back, and I continued on my way to the dollar store. Minutes later, I arrived, crossed the street to Dollar Tree, and then entered. I soon realized that the man who had been walking behind me on the sidewalk was also in the store. I found that slightly interesting, but I went around and shopped and got a few things. I wasn't there for too long, maybe 10 minutes at most. Then I checked out and left the store. When I did, I heard the doors open and close behind me. I turned across the street and noticed that the person who had left after me was the same guy yet again. I went back down the sidewalk and he went back after me. I was just thinking that it was all a coincidence. This guy must live near me and walked to the Dollar Tree as well and left at the same time as me. So I obviously knew that he was going to walk back with me most of the way. And he stayed at a sort of far distance when we walked. Nothing seemed too weird about it, other than the fact that we just had the same timing apparently. However, when I got back to my apartment building, I turned to enter the property. When I did, the man who was walking behind me turned as well. Now, I knew that he hadn't come from my apartment before, and I had never seen him around the complex prior to that either. He walked way faster at this point. By the time I got to the door, he was only like 10 feet behind me. I went inside like normal, and the man grabbed the door behind me before it closed and entered the building. I didn't know that he lived there. In fact, I was sure that he didn't, and I was wondering what he was doing. I walked down the hallway to my place. He was still behind me. When I got to the door, I went to unlock it. But the man was just standing there behind me, so I didn't unlock it. That's when I turned around instead and asked him what he was doing. He didn't answer me. He just stood there nonchalantly, now looking away, like it was normal to just stand in the middle of the hallway. I said louder, "What are you doing?" He looked over at me like he was surprised that I was even talking to him. There was nobody else even around at all. Who else would I be talking to? The guy then looked confused and gave me a dirty look, as if I was the weird one. He then took his phone out of his pocket and put it up to his ear, even though I could see that it was off. He was pretending now to be on the phone. He casually walked away and around the corner. I then went into my apartment and was sure to lock the door. I never saw the guy again. I still don't know what happened there. I used to work at a Dollar Tree several years ago. I was a cashier, but did some other stuff too. Most of the time, our store in particular was pretty quiet. Especially at night, it would be pretty dead for the last couple of hours of work. I remember at this particular time, my car had some problems, so my boyfriend would often pick me up from work and also drive me when he could. Other times, I would get rides to work from other people or even take the bus. One night, I was working a closing shift at the Dollar Tree. I believe we closed at 9 p.m., so it was kind of late, but nothing crazy. The dollar store was in this quiet strip mall, and none of the stores got that much business, it seemed. I think our store was the last one open on most nights, as the others would close at like 7 or 8, or even earlier. So by 8 p.m. on this particular evening, we had no customers in the store at all. My coworker left, and I was alone to close, which I was used to doing. I knew how to lock the doors and stuff, and it would be pretty easy for the final few hours. As I was there though, sometime after 8 o'clock, this man walked in the store. Right away he looked suspicious. When he walked in, his hood was up, his head was down, and he did a quick look over at me. It wasn't even cold or raining out. I didn't think anything of it though, and just stood by my register at the checkouts. The man inside went out of my sight, and I figured that he was just shopping. But a few minutes later, I was just randomly looking around, and I saw the guy seemingly watching me from in an aisle. Like he was just standing there doing nothing but staring at me. I didn't pay it any attention and minded my business. When I looked again, he was gone from that spot. But a few minutes later, I noticed him looking at me again from another spot. Soon after though, I stopped seeing him, but he didn't leave. I was a little nervous about the guy and didn't know what was going on. Overall though, I was just happy that I would be getting off work soon. I had a little less than an hour left. However, I didn't end up seeing the guy for the rest of my shift. Soon it was almost 9 o'clock and he was nowhere in my sight. He had been in the store for almost an hour and I hadn't seen him in like 30 minutes. I made an announcement on the store speakers that we were closing soon. However, when I did, there was no response from the guy. He didn't leave and he didn't come up to the front to check out. He was nowhere to be seen at all. I was starting to wonder if he had somehow left without me knowing. But that seemed impossible because the doors were pretty much right in front of my face, just off to the left. Plus, I would have heard the doors. I got up and decided to walk out in the aisles a bit. There was a good number of places that were out of my view in the store. When I did, I still couldn't find the guy. However, I did think that I heard footsteps, and the store was dead quiet. But it was hard to tell for sure, as if it was in fact footsteps, he was moving pretty quietly. Nevertheless, I was still like 90% sure that he was inside the store, and now this was really creeping me out. I went back up to the checkouts at the front of the store. There I saw out the large window my boyfriend arriving in his car. When he would pick me up, he never came inside, but just sat in his car and would wait for me to leave. This time I texted him and asked him to come inside the store. So he got out of his car and entered. He walked over to me at the registers and didn't know about the creepy guy. We just started talking about our days as there was less than 5 minutes left until we were closed. I felt a lot safer now that I was no longer by myself. Then, about 2 minutes later, I saw movement to my left. I looked over and saw the guy leaving the store. The suspicious man quickly walked out the doors and then disappeared into the parking lot and into the night. Then I quickly went over and locked the doors. I told my boyfriend about the guy. It was a huge relief that the man was gone. After that, I finished up my tasks and we left. I was nervous to work closing shifts after that and told my boss about it. Thankfully though, nothing like that happened again. I'm not sure if the man had something bad planned or if it was just some kind of crazy coincidence, but it almost seemed like he was hiding in the store. When he left, he didn't even buy anything, and he had been there for almost an hour. It still seems really sketchy in my opinion. When I was in high school, I was an active runner. I would run every day after school, which allowed me to clear my head or just get some clarity on things I had to decide. I had run track on and off since middle school, so I could keep up a good pace while running distance and even run a pretty decent mile. The story takes place around the time I was a senior in high school, so there was a lot on my mind. Things like which college I was going to attend, or which colleges I could even get into. Everything was changing pretty fast, and the amount of stress I had from school had finally gotten to me. So I decided that I would go running in a park after school one day just to give myself some time to think. The park was a pretty popular place, and it had some really great trails, and it helped that it wasn't far from my house, so I had ran there pretty often. I always felt safe while running in the park, as I saw lots of people I knew and would always see somebody else on the trails. There were some undeveloped areas that you could run in for some good scenic views, where you could sometimes see deer and other animals. When I had gotten to the park, there were people there, but it wasn't as busy as usual, which didn't bother me, as I had a lot on my mind and needed some time to run and just think. I did all the things I usually did, like stretch, and got ready to enter the woods. I put my headphones in, and the second I did, I blurred everything else out. I had started my run with a nice light jog and passed some people and smiled like normal, until there was a man who greeted me with a smile that was extremely unsettling. If I had to describe it, I would say imagine somebody is looking down and they smile with no teeth while bringing their eyes up. It was creepy, but I nodded and waved like I normally would. I tried not to pay too much attention to the man, and I kept running as I was at a public park and it wasn't unusual to see people. I had maybe run a few laps around the common park area and kept passing the man in the same area, which struck me as weird as I had run laps that took 5 to 8 minutes. Every time I would pass, I would politely nod and keep running. After a while, though, I started to think more about the situation. I began wondering why the man hadn't moved much from the original area I saw him in. At this point, I started seeing less people on the main trails as it became later in the afternoon. The sun was covered in the clouds, and although it hadn't set, it was getting darker and gloomy as if a storm were coming. It was late April, so it was hot and rainy, and I decided that I would run a little bit longer until it started to rain. Then I would head back to my car. I ran past the main parking lot and noticed that my car was the only car parked in the lot, so I knew that I was alone, and I figured everyone knew the rain was coming and had decided to leave. I ran towards the entrance and re-entered the running paths, passing the original place where I had seen the man, and he was gone. I slowed down, catching my breath, and walked slightly for a few minutes deeper on the trail. I was gathering my thoughts when I felt the feeling of being watched. I took my headphones out, and when I did, the park was silent, scary silent. You couldn't hear the trees blowing in the wind or cars from the main road. You could only hear my breath and the music blasting from my headphones. I looked around and didn't notice anything, so I kept walking, this time remaining vigilant as I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I was walking, I had my head down, and when I brought it up, I noticed the man from earlier walking in my direction, except this time he wasn't smiling. He looked agitated, and I didn't even bother to smile or wave. I kept my head down, but noticed he was in jeans, boots, and a long-sleeve shirt, something I hadn't noticed earlier. It wasn't unusual for somebody to be wearing that, but it was in the low 80s and humid from rain days prior, so I knew he had to be hot. I kept walking for a minute, hoping that I was in the clear, and when I made it probably 20 feet away, I turned around to see where he had gone, and to my surprise, he also turned around. He was walking in my direction now. I picked up my pace a little and started jogging, leaving my headphones out this time. Every step I took, I heard more behind me. I glanced back and noticed the man jogging as well. I was so deep into the trail, though, that I was equidistant to both the start and finish, and if I kept going, I would loop around to my car without having to turn around. I had close to a mile left on the trail, but every time I would pick up the pace, so would the man. I kept hoping that he would stop to take a breath, but he never did. I tried to rationalize it, but I couldn't, especially since every time I picked up the pace, he was quick to do the same as well. The area was much darker now, and the rain had started pouring. I was now drenched, and I looked back, and the man was even closer than before. He was gaining on me, and I knew that I had to make a fast decision, so I went for it in hopes that if he was following me, he wouldn't calculate my next move. I was approaching a scenic dip off the trail that had been overgrown and covered by leaves and sticks leaning downward on a slope like a tall hill. People had stopped running down it because of how steep it was, but it cut right down the main loop and led right to the parking lot kind of. At this point, the only people who really knew about it were the people who had run before it became overgrown. I picked up my pace as fast as I could and went straight for the main path. I went for it and covered my face with my arms, cutting a sharp left running through the twigs, vines, and leaves. I heard an audible gasp followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. I ran down the hill as fast as I could, hoping that I had made the right decision and too afraid to look back until I reached the bottom of the hill. I had put a good distance between us, and when I turned around and looked for the last time, he was standing at the top of the hill looking down at me. He looked annoyed and angry, like he was on the verge of a psychotic break. He was breathing heavily and covered in rain, just staring at me with such anger. I didn't stick around, and I ran as fast as I could towards my car, and I quickly jumped into it, pulling out of the parking lot as fast as I could. I looked in the rearview mirror, noticing the man at the edge of the woods staring, and it immediately sent chills down my spine, as there were no other cars in the parking lot. I was shaking the whole drive home, and was too afraid to tell my parents, because if they knew about it they wouldn't let me run again, and that was my only form of solitude. I laid in bed all night in fear, thinking about his unsettling smile and how creepy he was. I finally fell asleep after replaying scenarios of what could have happened in my head. I was awoken at 3 o'clock in the morning by my stepdad, who had just gotten home from work. I heard him enter the house in a panic, screaming for me, and I sat up. He came to my room asking if I was okay, and I asked why he pointed outside. I quickly went outside to see my car door opened and my car had been gone through, seats slashed, and a busted back window. I was confused, as nothing had been stolen, but just to destroy my car was strange. I started thinking about who would do something like that or why. We lived in a secluded area with only 2 neighbors who lived far enough from us to have not heard anything. Aside from the glass and cut seats, the only thing sitting on my seat was my registration. It suddenly dawned on me that when I had run to my car earlier that day, I jumped straight in and took off. I didn't unlock my car. It was older, so it had to be manually locked and unlocked with a key, but I didn't unlock it. I knew it had to be the man from earlier. He must have gone through my car, which I probably accidentally left unlocked at the park, and he must have seen my registration and gotten my name and address from it. I moved to college shortly after, and my family sold the house when I was in college, but it still makes me wonder what else he would have done knowing where I lived. I've been a police officer for a while now. I will tell you the experience that I have so far that creeps me out the most. This was when I was pretty new to being an officer. I was on patrol and driving the pretty standard police car. It was late at night and probably about 11 p.m. There was a call for a noise complaint that I was going to investigate. To me, it seemed like not that big of a deal, but you never know what can happen. So it was just me going to the scene. No other officers were there or going to go there. I drove to the address, and the neighborhood was pretty quiet, but average for the most part. I guess I would say that the houses were a little more spread out here with larger yards. There was also a good amount of trees in the area, and on this particular street, many of the houses had large woods bordering the ends of their backyards. This was part of a nearby park and golf course, and overall just more wild area. This street was kind of the last one in the neighborhood before the more wild land. So anyways, I parked my car on the side of the road in front of the address. Then I walked up the sidewalk and up the driveway. The house in question looked old, and it looked like nobody was home. I observed that all the windows were covered by shades, and all the lights in the house appeared to be off as well. The grass in the front yard was overgrown, and there were no cars in the driveway. Overall, the entire property was in rough shape. I wasn't hearing any noise though, so I walked up to the front door and tried ringing the doorbell. I heard nothing at all. After a little while, I knocked on the door, but there was still nothing. I waited about a minute and looked around. The whole neighborhood was very quiet. I looked at the house number, and I was definitely at the right address. I knocked one more time and announced myself. There was still nothing. As I was standing there on the front step and looking around, I saw a neighbor. A car drove down the street and pulled into the driveway next door. I left the front step and started walking over to them. The neighbor parked in the driveway of their house and then left the car. It was a woman, and I waved to her and then walked over. I asked her if she knew the neighbors next door at all, and I pointed to the house. She told me that nobody lived there and that the house had been abandoned for a while. This surprised me to hear that, but it also didn't surprise me that much given the condition of the property. I asked her if anybody ever went there or if she heard loud noises. She said no, and she wasn't aware of anybody ever being there. I told her to have a good night, and then I walked back over to the house, feeling confused. I was going to knock one more time and then I guess leave, because there didn't seem to be anybody there and there wasn't any noise going on that I heard. When I got back over to the front step, I was approaching it, and I was sure that I heard somebody inside. It was the sound of somebody moving away from the front of the house and walking towards the back of it. The footsteps were easy to hear because of how quiet it was. After hearing this, I knocked on the door again and announced myself. I really thought that they would answer that time. I knew someone was in there, but still, there was nothing. I stood there for about another minute, and then I left the front step. but I did not leave. Instead, I walked around to the side of the house and then the backyard. I was wondering if maybe there was a more common door used, such as one at the side, and I was also curious to see if there were any signs of people in the backyard or other places on the property. Possibly there would be sign of forced entry if the house was in fact vacant and somebody had broken in. It was very dark back there. I walked around but didn't see anything out of the normal. It was very overgrown back there as well, and so that didn't help much. I spent maybe 5 minutes walking the property and then went back around. When I got towards the front of the house again, I heard a loud noise. It sounded like something being smashed, almost like somebody was taking a baseball bat to the kitchen and just smashing stuff. It was very loud. I couldn't see in the windows and obviously did not know what it was, but I now knew what the noise complaint had probably been about. I walked back over to the front step quickly and then I banged on the front door. The loud noises had gone on for maybe 30 seconds. As soon as I knocked on the door though, they abruptly stopped. Once more, nobody came to the door and the house became silent again. As I was standing there on the step, I suddenly heard the back door to the house open. When it did, I instantly left the step and ran around the house. I got into the backyard and saw a man standing at the backside of the yard. I yelled at him to stop, but he didn't even turn back and look at me. He was not running, but walking rather quickly and heading straight for the woods. I ran after him as the guy entered the thick forest. I couldn't make out much about him because I really only saw his backside. By the time I reached the woods, he had been in there for a good 30 seconds. It was really overgrown back there and also very hard to see. Using my flashlight, I walked around in the woods looking for the man. I called out for him multiple times, and I sort of heard noises in the distance for a while, and I walked towards them, but soon things were quiet again. I looked around the woods for a good 10 minutes, but could not find the guy. Then I went back to the house. I called in what happened on the radio, and another officer in the area joined me on the scene. The back door to the house was wide open, and the house was confirmed to be vacant as well. Inside the house, it looked like things had been smashed with a bat, but nobody else was in there. We looked around more, but never found the man. Something about that night just really creeped me out, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. Maybe that's because it was my first time dealing with a situation where things went kind of unexpected. I'm really not sure what was going on there. I think the guy inside thought that I had left when I went in the backyard, and that's why he was smashing stuff again. Why he was smashing stuff at all, though, I don't know, and why he was even in the house, I also don't know, because the property was vacant. But when he left, he just kind of disappeared in the woods, and that was really strange. Overall, it was a crazy experience.